Welcome to CISO Conversations EU Data Regulations. As always, I'm your host, Kev Johnson. If you, like so many security and IT leaders out there, are seeking ways to navigate the new EU data regulations, you've come to the right place. We're serving you insights and best practices from leading experts on data security on how the rollout of multiple data regulations within the EU is putting everyone's minds to the test. Today, we've invited back our extraordinary panel from our last episode to further discuss if or how regulatory oversight committees are solving the problems for cyber resilience. We're very excited to welcome back into the studio Trish McGill, Executive Subject Matter Expert for Cybersecurity, IT and OT, Brian Wagner, Head of Security and Compliance at AWS in EMEA, Tim Clements, Data Protection Expert and Rubrik's own Field CTO.
All right, and finally, Tim.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Tim Clements. I'm based in Copenhagen. I've got my own business, Purpose and Means, helping primarily global companies strategize, orchestrate their data protection programs. I'm also a faculty member of the International Association of Privacy Professionals, the IPP.
All right, thank you all. To get there, to get to that point where we have confidence in our capabilities to respond to a cyber attack, Tim, are there any compromises that need to be made in order for organizations to reach that good level of confidence with regards to security, or can they just have it all without any kind of compromise?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest compromise that I come across, and maybe this isn't exactly the angle that you may have been looking for, but I think it's an extremely important exercise. And we're talking about risk still, and that is engaging with senior management. Because yes, everyone's clear about risk, or are they? Are they really clear about the value of what needs to be protected? And this is something that, again, from a data protection perspective, I like to ask if I get the chance to sit in front of, members of the C-suite, is, do you understand the value of your information or the value, of your data? Can you quantify it? What calculation do you use, and so on and so forth? And unfortunately, the majority of people don't know. And these are senior executives, C-suite players. They don't understand the value of what it is that they are protecting from a data or information perspective. And the loss of that data, what impact would it have to the business? The impact of whether it's customer churn, stock price, etc., reputation, and quantifying those actually hard to measure, the intangibles. So from my perspective, as I said previously, risk management is everything. And I think this engagement with senior leadership is often my number one priority, to educate, other key stakeholders, but specifically them, in the basic risk management that we're talking about. As I said in the previous question, the different, differentiating between them, and to then get them to work on a risk policy, to facilitate that process, get a risk policy document that is contextual to the organization, not just a generic copy-paste from somewhere else, that should set out the risk appetite, tolerance levels for all different types of risk. Because how else can managers, employees operate within the risk management framework that you're trying to implement if leadership don't get it themselves, or if it's misaligned? So from my perspective, that does start at the top. How can you get employees to make risk acceptance decisions if it's not set out, if top management don't understand it? And often they're the ones who are sometimes involved in critical decision making around investment into security programs, data protection programs. So do they really fully understand the consequences of maybe downplaying that type of thing? So to me, it does start very much at the top in this instance, and that is a compromise, because obviously senior management don't like to be educated, or they're a little bit reluctantly to be called into a training session. But I think that has to happen.
I totally agree. And you also made a point around pretty much knowing the data. And I think this is critical as well. And that's also part of that education that the work you are talking about. Like, it is quite shocking to see still how many organizations and actually key stakeholders don't necessarily know exactly what kind of sensitive data is stored and where and who can access it. And that becomes more and more of a problem as, and we said it at the beginning, as cyber attacks evolve, and as part of this evolution, we tend to see more and more double extortion threats and data exfiltration, and more, there's only data exfiltration and not even an encryption even of the existing data. And that's just because, unfortunately, the bad guys know that there's so much sensitive data pretty much everywhere now. It's not only in the data centers, it's in the cloud, it's a little bit everywhere, so that there's more potential for them to make money out of that. And so I think that's a big problem. I think, and I agree, that there needs to be a lot more education to be done at the C-suite level as well around this. And ultimately, the idea would be, well, if they are educated, if they are aware of this, they would probably try to measure more and to get to know their data sets more and potentially reduce the risk of exposure, ultimately. So if we try to think a little bit about the future and the readiness for the future, again, getting back to the fact that, for example, with NIS2, this will be applicable starting from October next year. Actually, there are two things that I think that organizations have been kind of preparing for over the years. There are both planned and unplanned events that actually put some extra pressure on all of this and on cyber resilience capabilities. For the unplanned part, I think that's quite well mastered in my opinion, but there's a bunch of things that we can put into that kind of bucket, which are things such as, unfortunately, geopolitical conflicts, which are quite present in Europe today, unfortunately. Natural disasters, that's also quite current with climate changes. I'm in France. I don't know if you've heard, but the weather has been quite crazy. It's been raining cats and dogs in the country for some time now, and we've had some massive floodings in the north of France. So these are examples of devastating events that are almost impossible to predict, that's for sure, but that most organizations have been able to prepare for, with things such as business continuity and disaster recovery plans and things like that. But for the planned ones, and I just give an example because I'm in France and I'm French, but I'll take another one that I think is a really good one, and I can't help but thinking of that example, which are the Olympics that will take place next year in France, in Paris. And we know for a fact that there's always a spike in cyber attacks in the country that hosts the Olympics and the year that they take place. So, actually, Brian, do you think that cyber resilience capabilities and strategies differ from BCDR scenarios compared to what we should do for this kind of planned events? Should they remain pretty much the same, or should we approach this differently from a cyber resiliency perspective?
I think the approach should always be the same, and I'll explain that in just a second. But I think the way you assess that, of course, is very different. For the unknown, you can't possibly plan for anything, but for the known, especially if it's an external event like the Olympics or Rugby World Cup as well in France recently, I guess your assets are either net new because you're hosting this new event, or at least you can focus on what is expected to be targets of attack. But ultimately, your cyber resilience plan should withstand either scenario. I mean, simply for the fact that attack vectors, malware, threat actors, these things are changing daily. I mean, there's literally a term for it in the malware community called 0 days. They're called 0 days because they're unknown until they've revealed themselves. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is you can plan all you like, but that's one of the biggest fallacies of any security professional can be guilty of, is thinking that your job is done, right? Security is an arms race. Just because we have an event this weekend doesn't mean that what I know now is going to apply tomorrow. But going back to the common approach, we've covered quite a bit of very applicable things already. Things like education, testing, a lot of testing, red teaming. Because again, as I said before, like an attack is rarely a big bang. You're not going to be sitting there one day watching the Olympics. Yeah, the news sort of makes it look like a big bang, like, oh no, everything is been shut down. But really, if you've been taking a methodical approach to protecting the infrastructure, assets, and everything in between, then that includes monitoring and, like I say, testing and analyzing the your traffic and your user behavior. Oftentimes, attackers have been snooping around networks for weeks and even months, and you should be able to see that if you've been taking that consistent approach. So like I say, having advanced knowledge of an event, it might make you heighten senses, but ultimately shouldn't really change your program as long as it is, of course, robust enough.
Yeah, at least in the philosophy and the approach, as you said. Tim, what key considerations would you recommend organization to make if they are tasked with making trade-offs in risk management for the benefit of the financial longevity of the organization?
I think you've got to get the basics right first. I mean, it's difficult to make those kinds of assessments. Again, a little bit similar to what I said earlier around education. You can't. You either do risk management right, or it's wrong. I don't think there's much in between. You're either in control of your risk or you're not in control. And sometimes when I look at some of the methods that some companies use to measure risk, it would be difficult for them to actually make informed decision making around trade-offs and so on, because it's often using qualitative approaches. Can sometimes be kind of more of a gut feeling. So I think it's about using methods that are more realistic and contextual than something that's going to create some kind of false illusion. So my advice, and I see a lot of companies moving in this direction now, they're kind of scrapping those 5x5 risk heat maps, which have long been a favorite of the boardroom because they look nice and kind of give a full sense of that you're in control, and to bring in more quantitative methods, simulation methods like Monte Carlo and so on, which is more based on probabilities and statistics. It takes a bit more of education, but again, if the outcome is more important to get to achieve that, you can't do it with just gut feeling and kind of outdated methods.
Makes sense. Trish, how much of it all, think profits, people, stability, resilience, and we truly have without compromising business resilience? If you were to look like 2-3 years out, maybe, where do you see the biggest impact will happen, either based on data regulation impacts or the severity of cyber attacks, or maybe something completely different?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's all of the above, because while we're talking here, new things are happening left and right. Brian just touched on that too. As it's a rat race we're in now towards bigger technology, more connecting, but at the same time, the bad guys are doing the same thing and inventing how they could actually attack us. So I believe that finally the message is going to land with every roadmap that corporations have to make, is that we need to make sure we're resilient. We need to make sure that whatever happens, that we can continue our operation. May it not be perfect at 100%, but we have to have backup plans in place because the public is relying on us. Whereas in the future, in the past, it was more, we need to prevent cyber attacks. There's no such thing as preventing them. We can't. Now it's more that when, not if, but when we get attacked, can we continue our business? I think that's the key question for the next few years.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it's really interesting also to stay up to date, and follow the evolution of cyber attacks. I was mentioning before that, for example, we see more and more double extortion threats, but we also see more and more cyber attacks and ransomware attacks where there's no encryption event. They just steal the data, they exfiltrate the data and then sell it because that's where they're making money. But what's kind of shocking is that, and that's something really new, is that now what we see in that will reconnect to, I think, the need of having a more regulated environment, is that now the bad guys, when they find out that the victim did not notify the regulator, they would actually file a complaint to the regulator. So I don't know if you've seen that recently, like literally this week, we've seen such a case happening, and actually the bad guys filed a complaint to the SEC because the victim did not notify that they were a victim of a cyber attack, so, which means that they would risk fines in that case. So it's really getting more and more critical, not only to be very regulated and to give a context or a framework in what we should do to improve the cybersecurity posture, but also to reduce the risk as a whole. And getting back to, knowing your data, we're talking about data exfiltration and notification here. But knowing the data, reducing, the risk of exposure by knowing exactly what we have, what kind of sensitive data we have, where it is, who can access it, and making sure that we only have what needs to happen and not more will actually reduce that risk. We are getting closer to the end of that webinar and that conversation. So, Tim, maybe final question to you. What's the one data protection area you think organizations will succeed with over the next few years? And maybe where do you think they will fail?
Right. So I think what will help organizations succeed is recognizing, just like I mentioned earlier, data protection is more than just solely a legal issue. So move and anchor data protection, the leadership of the data protection program, move it somewhere where it makes sense. To me, move it as close as you can to where the actual processing is taking place. In that sense, data protection, GDPR is regulating the processing of personal data. To me, the clues are in the word processing and data. That doesn't happen in the legal department. So look where the tech is being deployed. Especially in the marketing area, product development, that's where the key risks are from a data protection perspective. So anchor it if you can in those areas. That's where the budgets are also being deployed. That's where the money is. Traditional budgets in legal departments or IT departments, finance and so on, are traditionally low. So that to me is the one area that will help you succeed. Also embedding responsibilities deep in the organization, making people realize that, if they're quite happy to take the glory when they, get the data-driven growth strategy achieved, the objective achieved, if they don't see data protection obligations as their problem, they, tend to push it out onto the other team. To me, it's two sides of the same coin. It's the same data. And I think that's a big education. It's not a different commodity. It's exactly the same data. It's a tough nut to crack. It takes time. It takes, realistically, 1 or 2 years to really make that organizational change. In terms of the failing, I think it's about accountability. Often people think we have to demonstrate accountability just for the supervisory authorities, the regulators and so on. They forget that they're being held account by many different other groups, including, the activists, the Max Schrems of this world, who are, they don't need to leave the comfort of their office. They can look at the websites of companies and get a clear view as to whether those companies get data protection or not. And, you mentioned complaints. Well, their business is mass kind of complaining. And that's where, Max Schrems and his organization, they're not alone. There's a lot of other people out there who are holding companies to account. And if you fail to realize that and just focus on what the regulator may say, that's how I think you may fail.
Thank you for sharing that view, Tim. Brian, do you think there will be a next big cyber incident that will change the perception of what cyber resilience truly is? What do you think that would look like?
That is a very interesting question and also equally terrifying question to think about. But the first thing that comes to mind is I read an article about, first, before I'll give you the kind of the punchline. It will involve AI. AI is on everybody's, it's a buzzword for a reason, right? It's real. It's out there. It is becoming commoditized in both good and bad ways. But it is hard to sort of imagine what the next one will be like. But it's not hard. When I read an article not too long ago about a simulation that the United States Air Force ran, purely simulation, that they basically put a simulator out with professional, very experienced fighter pilots and one AI enemy pilot in the simulation. Now, these are highly skilled fighter pilots with years and years of experience on the latest, technology. And the AI won hands down because it was performing movements, which are actually not only not physically possible by a human, but actually outlawed in some ways by the U.S. Military because they are so highly dangerous to the individual flying the aircraft. But what that tells us about the parallel that it signals to me about, apply the same concept to cyber attacks is, AI is adaptable in the moment. It could compress, weeks, months, even years of reconnaissance. And it can adapt to a situation. You sort of give it an end goal and it will find its way there. Other sort of more tertiary applications to cyber crimes, such as crafting very convincing phishing emails, or we've seen deepfakes now, and those are only going to get better. I mean, imagine a video call from, the chairman that says we need to do, this, convincing someone that they need to act on something. It's already hard, and it's just going to get more and more difficult. And we'll see, we will unfortunately see that in probably not too distant future, an AI-based cyber attack.
Yeah, and that's for sure. I mean, we've been seeing this. AI is a real thing, as you said, and the bad guys are definitely leveraging it. That's for sure. So it's going to be interesting to see what it's become over the next few years. Trish, final question to you. Are regulatory oversight committees solving the problems for cyber resilience in critical infrastructure organizations, in your opinion?
They're helping. That's for sure.
They're helping.
Absolutely. They're absolutely helping us, but also leadership, because ultimately a regulation really supports it. But I think if we take it back to the basic security, a security operations center, testing, and all those steps, the regulations are telling you to do just that. So if we do the foundation, the basic security requirements that we actually already know we need to do, that actually goes right into the NIS2 directive and all the future ones that are coming. Also the AI regulations and let alone all the quantum technology regulations that are coming up. If you keep basic security hygiene in place and test that, then I think you are very far ahead of many organizations.
All right. And that will be, I guess, the conclusion. Thank you very much to you all for joining us today.
All right, that wraps up today's episode of CISO Conversations, EU Data Regulations. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want more insights on navigating data regulations, join us next time, where we give you a breakdown of what security and IT leaders must understand about the latest updates around the NIS2 EU directive and how this regulation is already branching out outside EU member countries. Rubrik is on a mission to secure the world's data. We help organisations uphold data integrity, deliver data availability that withstands adverse conditions, continuously monitor data risks and threats, and recover their data when they're attacked. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. See you next time.